This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Postponed by a president's absence, Gabon's cabinet is finally able to meet after a constitutional change allowed the VP to chair the meeting.
Article 13, which deals with the vacancy and permanent impediment in the office of the President of the Republic, is very clear.
The US is to cut hundreds of troops in Africa. We find out what impact this will have on counter-terrorism on the continent. Relations under strain. Denmark, the European Union and the World Bank hit back at Tanzania over rights concerns. Also in the program, Horns of Hope. 10 months from his death, friends from around the world celebrate the life of Hugh Masekela, the trumpeting legend and the man.
I know Hugh as an activist more than a musician.
And in sports, it's a weekend of football with qualifying games for next year's Africa Cup of Nations and the kickoff to the Women's Cup of Nations. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. First to Gabon, where the first cabinet meeting in 3 weeks has been held in the absence of President Ali Bongo. Vice President Pierre Claver Mganga Masavu chaired the cabinet after the Constitutional Court intervened on Thursday to allow him to do so. President Ali Bongo is reportedly ill and remains in hospital in Saudi Arabia. Clarisse Fortuné has more.
More than 3 weeks since Gabon's president was last seen in public, the country's constitutional court took action yesterday, empowering the vice president to fill some of the power vacuum. President Bongo has been missing from action since he was taken ill at a conference in Saudi Arabia on the 24th of October. Officials initially downplayed his illness, but with speculation about his future mounting, they admitted on Sunday that he had undergone surgery.
Son Excellence, le Président de la République Ali Bongo Ondimba.
His Excellency, the President, is better and is resting now at the King Faisal Hospital in Riyadh. The President calls on the Gabonese people to be vigilant in view of the spread of fake news and other false information on social media and some internet sites that hardly qualify as information. These, we can confirm, are spreading only misinformation and lies.
The Bongo family have ruled Gabon for nearly half a century, and Ali Bongo has been president since succeeding his father in 2009. But it was Vice President Pierre Claver Maganga Moussavu who chaired a cabinet meeting today, the first time they've met since the president's absence. That was made possible by modification to the constitution to address the scenario of temporary incapacity by the head of state. Previously, the president would have had to authorize the vice president to chair any cabinet meeting. And if the court confirmed that the president was incapacitated, then the Speaker of the Senate would take charge, whilst elections are organized. Opposition and civil society groups are concerned by the changes.
The decision taken yesterday by the Constitutional Court is unconstitutional. Article 13, which deals with the vacancy and permanent impediment in the office of the President of the Republic, is very clear.
It is a way of avoiding the constitutional requirement for a power vacuum to be established and for the President of the Senate to act as interim president until the next elections are held.
Supporters of the president insist that he is recovering well and will return to his position soon. In the meantime, the cabinet is getting back to running the country. Clarisse Fortuné, BBC News.
Well, let's bring in Anne-Marie Diaz-Borges from BBC Afrique. She's been following developments for us in Gabon. Anne-Marie, we've heard there from the opposition and activists, but what are the ordinary Gabonians, the Gabonese people, what are they saying?
I think confusion is the key term, because we have here the government saying, well, hang on a second, the president is unwell. Now we know that he's unwell. He might not be back within, in a few months, but still, we have to get things running in his absence. Now, according to the Constitution, not much can happen with the president's absence. And what's happened is that the Constitution has been changed. Some people actually call it a constitutional coup because the way it was changed, it wasn't through a referendum, by law as it has to be, or it wasn't as well, decided by the legal means that are usually put in place. So this is a very, very exceptional scenario that we have. We have the Constitution that has been amended in a totally different way. So in the streets of Libreville and all around Gabon, people are very confused. Do we have a change of presidency coming up, or is this truly temporary? And in which case, I mean, people are just baffled. They don't know what to expect at all.
All right, so now we have the vice president who chaired a first cabinet in 3 weeks today.
Yes.
But how much power does he really have? What functions can he perform?
That's another confusion as well, because this has never ever happened in Gabon. Nothing about it in the Constitution. The authorities are saying, yes, you can hold a meeting, of the ministers, but yet no laws can be signed by any of those ministers, including the prime minister. They have to wait by law for the president to return. But when is the president coming back? We don't know. So anything that's decided will just be put on the shelf.
President Ali Bongo wields both personal and executive powers. Is it possible at all that the court could have gone ahead and changed this constitution or remodeled it, so to speak, without his authority?
That's a very good question, because constitution, people who are specialized in the constitution are saying we only can change that constitution by referendum, or if, the legal jurisdictions decide it. But we have the government and the head of the president of the constitution, the court, the constitutional court, which is saying what we are doing is absolutely legal, because this is an absolute, everything is happening as a surprise. So we have a surprise decision for you. Everything is legal.
Some very interesting developments there in Gabon. Anne-Marie Diaz-Bogies, thank you. Thank you. Now let's take a quick look at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. 2 students have been shot dead by police during protests this week in the capital, Kinshasa. One died on Monday when students at Kinshasa University demonstrated over a lecturer's pay strike. On Thursday, there was rioting after students learned of the death. A second student was killed. Funeral prayers have been said at a mosque in the holy city of Medina in Saudi Arabia for the murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Similar events are being held in Istanbul, London, Paris and Washington. Mr. Khashoggi was murdered in the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul 6 weeks ago. Now, the U.S. Department of Defense has announced plans to reduce its troops in Africa over the next few years. Defense budget cuts mean the U.S. Africa Command will lose nearly 10% of its 7,000 personnel. Now, earlier this year, the U.S. military put countering China and Russia at the center of its new national defense strategy. Well, let's speak to the Africa security correspondent now, Tommy Oladipo in Nairobi. Tommy, is it clear which countries will be affected by this?
Well, there's been no specific country or countries named in this, although West Africa as a region has been mentioned as one that will be affected. For example, looking at countries like Cameroon, where there are about 300 U.S. troops who've been training Cameroonian forces, the U.S. feels that these Cameroonian forces have received enough training, enough support for them to stand on their own feet. Also, elsewhere in West Africa, France seems to have a solid presence across there, and so the U.S. is looking and saying they don't want to duplicate efforts, so they rather step back and only support France using intelligence and advice. But in countries like Djibouti, in Somalia, in Libya, U.S. operations will receive minimal reductions following these cuts.
So then what impact would this have on counter-terrorism activities?
Well, I don't think there'll be major effects on counterterrorism operations. Probably just a shift in terms of method. For example, there might be more emphasis on the use of airstrikes, having just their drone bases with fewer personnel. But let's remember, this is just a few hundred soldiers being removed from more than 7,000 who are assigned to Africa.
All right, Tommy Oladipo for us there in Nairobi. Thank you. Now, police in southern Zimbabwe say more than 40 people have been killed after a suspected gas tank exploded on a bus. The accident happened in Gwanda district, over 500 kilometers south of Harare, Zimbabwe's capital. Now, this is the second major fatal accident in 2 weeks in Zimbabwe after 50 people died in a recent accident involving 2 buses. Well, the BBC's Shingai Nyoka joins us from Harare. Shingai, what happened really? Shingai, if you can hear me, bring us up to speed with exactly what happened. Well, we seem to have some connectivity problems there. We'll try and reach her, if we can, a little later in the program, if we can. But this is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, sports. Africa's best female footballers get ready to battle it out to see who is the continent's #1 team. I'm Sophie Ikenye. The top story on this program. The first cabinet meeting in 3 weeks in the absence of Gabon's president, Ali Bongo, has been held. The vice president chaired it after the constitution was modified. The European Union has said it's launching a comprehensive review of its policies towards Tanzania before resuming any talks with the government. The bloc says it is concerned about recent political developments in the country, citing restrictions on the media and political parties, as well as lack of respect for human rights. It comes after Denmark announced it was withdrawing $10 million in aid and the World Bank withholding loans. I asked the country's foreign minister, Dr. Augustin Mahiga, for his reaction. We spoke to him just before he boarded a flight, so we apologize in advance for the image quality.
Today we had a very fruitful discussion with the Vice President of the World Bank. My president had a 3-hour discussion with him on that very issue. And he clarified that the girls' education for those who have dropped out will be given alternative sources of education. And that is where we are proceeding, and the cancellation certainly has been withdrawn.
What do you make of that policy of expelling girls from schools? Because that's the biggest concern, isn't it?
Actually, it's not an expulsion as such, but it's to give them an opportunity for an alternative source of education in a different venue, rather than continue in a regular school, pregnant, nursing mothers, but there are alternatives that can be offered. And this is what we agreed upon with the World Bank. This would be different kind of setting and education and opportunity that are available to those who are dropping out of school.
So, all right, so Denmark did withdraw some money yesterday, about $9 million. I'm wondering, Dr. Mahiga, how will the country make it? How will it make up this fund that's being withdrawn by these countries?
We are very surprised by Denmark doing that, rather than have a discussion with us. Certainly that is their money, and it's going to hurt us, but we think there should have been an opportunity for dialogue before they unilaterally just cancel this amount of money against Tanzania. And this has been a unilateral action by a country that has been a friend of Tanzania for the past 50 years.
Another issue that's been a talking point is the issue of the freedom of the press. There's been a clampdown on journalists. Just last week, 2 of them were arrested on what they say are trumped-up charges. Why is Tanzania curtailing the freedom of the press?
No, I think this must be seen in a wider context. There was a time, if you have been following, Tanzania was going through a systematic challenge of fighting corruption, fighting terrorist elements, fighting poaching elements, anti-drug campaign. It was around that time that these elements that were actually fighting the government, that the press or elements of the press thought they were being suppressed. But it was a context when the government was engaged in a very difficult campaign against elements that are threatening the stability of the country.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's time now for some sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And 3 matches in qualifying for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations today. And by Monday, pretty much everyone in contention for a place in Cameroon 2019 will have played their penultimate games in the preliminary competition. One game was played earlier today with Burundi beating South Sudan 5-2 in Juba. A hat-trick in that game for Fistou Abdul Razak. It means Burundi now top Group C on 9 points, at least until Mali and Gabon square up on Saturday. South Sudan has thus failed to win a single game in these qualifiers so far. Now on Saturday, 1996 champions South Africa take on 3-time winners Nigeria in Soweto. A win for either side means they qualify for the tournament, but both teams can qualify if they draw and Libya fails to beat the Seychelles. Bafana Bafana head coach Stuart Baxter believes it'll be a tough game.
It'll be a very tough game. Nigeria are a good team. They'll create problems for us on many levels, physically, tactically, technically. It's up to us to answer those questions. I think if we stretch ourselves and we play to the best of our ability and implement a game plan that I think will give them problems, and they don't, then they'll have a problem with us.
Well, some of the permutations for the weekend: if both Algeria and Benin win their games in Group D, they can both qualify. The Gambia must win against Benin to keep alive their slim hopes of qualification. And in Group G, Zimbabwe will qualify if they beat Liberia in Monrovia. Now, it's qualifying for the Men's Nations Cup this weekend, but in Ghana, it is the Africa Women's Cup of Nations itself which kicks off. Nigeria are defending champions. The Super Falcons are totally dominant with success in 8 of the 10 tournaments to take place so far. The BBC's Janine Anthony is there.
We are one night away from Africa's biggest women's football competition, the Africa Women Cup of Nations, and it's an 11th edition. All 8 teams are currently in the host country, Ghana. 4, Group A, will be playing in Accra, and the remaining 4 will be playing from Cape Coast. The big news from all of this is Nigeria have said they are looking to defend their title and make it 9 wins out of 11. But hot on their heels are South Africa's Banyana, who are Africa's form team, coming to this tournament with friendlies under their belts. Ghana are looking to host it and win it, and the coach has mentioned that they want to win 2 birds with 1 stone, while Cameroon's captain Mani Christine has mentioned that they'll be looking to go 1 step further and win the title. The other teams, Algeria, Equatorial Guinea, Zambia and Mali, are in here for the experience and looking to get better at this. While a big incentive will be 3 World Cup tickets to the 2019 World Cup in France, the biggest prize will be Queen of Africa. Janine Anthony reporting from Accra.
Indeed. So the 3 teams that finish the highest should represent the continent at the World Cup next year. The winning team will earn $80,000 US, a 60% increase on the previous prize money, but still well behind the men's game. As a comparison, the winners in the men's under-17 Cup of Nations will be given $150,000. Vice President of CAF, Amaju Penek, says the figures reflect the relative levels of interest and sponsorship in the game.
Is the viewership, is the following that brings about the finances everywhere in the world. The World Cup, the main World Cup, is the most followed event in the world. The Women's World Cup is not as half as being followed, so they cannot at the moment. Maybe in future, yes, but right now, if you look at these parameters, you'll know that men will always be in front.
Meanwhile, Kenya have lost their case to be reinstated into the African Women's Cup of Nations after the Court of Arbitration for Sports rejected their appeal. We'll stay in Kenya for some athletics now, and former Olympic chief Kipchoge Keino will become a witness for the prosecution after charges of corruption at the 2016 Olympics against him were dropped. The 78-year-old 2-time Olympic gold medalist was due to be charged with 6 other officials, including former Kenyan sports minister Hassan Wario, over the misappropriation of more than $500,000. But the prosecution told the court today that the charges against Keino had been dropped and that he will appear as a key prosecution witness. And the great Haile Gebrselassie has been explaining his decision to step away from his job as president of the Ethiopian Athletics Federation. He says the stress from the role gave him high blood pressure because a vocal group of athletes had been unhappy with his leadership.
Some of those athletes were not satisfied, and they come up, with the kind of demonstration. Very few, unknown maybe, but I don't see, they are unknown or they are big names. But if I don't satisfy them, why he should stay? I have to give a chance for others. It's not the highest property. It's not just the only person who changed athletics. There is someone. That's what I believe.
You know what, Sophie? He actually goes on to say, I don't want to be seen as a sit-tight ruler like other African countries.
Oh,
marvelous stuff.
At the right time, at the right place.
Absolutely.
Ethiopia, indeed, isn't it? With all the changes that are going on there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the sport, Peter. Thank you. There you are. In life, Hugh Masekela was many things to many people: a musician, an activist, an artist. But to the people he played with, Bra Hugh was family. 10 months after his death, friends from around the world are coming together to celebrate him through music. We caught up with some of them in Johannesburg ahead of a tribute show in London this weekend.
Well, I first met Bra Hugh in 1984. This guy jumped on stage with a horn in hand. Okay, as much as I don't like people disturbing my choreography, but here's the man who's playing so well. And I was like, no, he should carry on. So when I took a break, that's when I spoke to him and he told me it was Hugh Masekela.
I consider him one of the best storytellers of all time in song like that, because, and the thing about him that when you learn his music with the words, especially a lot of the songs that I have been drawn to are the ones that tell a particular story from A to B to Z. Bra Hugh was a really lovely human being, but Bra Hugh didn't suffer fools gladly. You know, he was very forthright, straightforward, and if you were up to nonsense, he would, you know, give you short shrift like that, and he would tell you indaba zakho, as it were. But he was cool. He was a cool guy.
I want to see it walking down the streets of South Africa.
I know Bra Hugh as an activist more than a musician. I know Bra Hugh as a proud African. And I know Bra Hugh as a good friend. He might be gone, but he left us a legacy of music that talks sense.
Indeed, he did leave a legacy. Now, one of the greatest works of modern art has been sold at auction in New York for just over $90 million. Portrait of an artist who, with two figures, was painted in 1972 by British artist David Hockney. Its sale set a new record for a work by a living artist sold at auction. Look at that. Well, before we go, a quick look at our top story today on Focus on Africa. The first cabinet meeting in 3 weeks has been held in the absence of President Ali Bongo. Vice President Pierre Claver Mganga Musavu chaired the cabinet after the Constitutional Court intervened on Thursday to allow him to do so. President Ali Bongo is reportedly ill and remains in hospital in Saudi Arabia. And of course, you can keep up with all the latest news from the continent. Go to BBC our website, specifically over the week. It's bbc.com/Africa. That's all from the program. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for your company.